Hello and welcome, star people. This is APM, your intrepid star guide, and this is the Outlaw Astrology Podcast, episode 131. And today we're going to continue our archetypal journey through the zodiac with Gemini, the cosmic messenger and weaver of connections. Before we get to that, some gentle reminders. We have the newsletter called the Daily Stargazer, free and paid versions. The free version, maybe 1 to 2 posts per month. For the free version, 1 to 2 posts per month. The paid version is every week. Okay, I can be found on Instagram at the Outlaw Astrology, Pinterest at Outlaw Astrology, and YouTube at Outlaw Astrology. Those links will be, all of them, in the show notes. And with that being said, onward. So let's talk about Gemini, the divine communicator. The divine communicator awakens. And so the eternal dialogue, we're going to explore Gemini as the archetype that introduces multiplicity, which makes me think of the film Multiplicity, which I love, by the way, and relation to the cosmos. And that's a principle that moves beyond singularity into exchange. So it's an eternal dialogue. Now, Mercury is the divine intelligence that powers this Gemini energy. And Gemini's planetary ruler it represents the cosmic principle that creates meaning through relationship, comparison, and contrast. So it's how the mind works. It's the mind, it's the communication, naturally a third house energy. But you can find that planetary energy in any part of the chart, in any sign. But it is known as, it's famous for being affiliated and a correspondence and affinity with Gemini. And it's how we understand the world. That's what it symbolizes in the chart. It tends to be very transgressive energy. It is neither here nor there. It tends to be very liminal. And in Tarot, it is represented as the magician energy, to give you an idea of what that might look like. But you're free to use your own imagination and come up with a visualization or keywords that work better for you if these do not work. Now, Gemini is the thinker, the communicator, the inquisitive seeker. One might even say the fool or the page or what have you. The Knight of Swords, definitely Gemini energy, okay? And so, like I said, it's about relationship. It catches patterns, it's inquisitive, it's very curious energy, and Mercury is naturally at home in Gemini because it gets to do what it likes to do, which is find relationships to things, compare those things to one another, and to see the contrast. Because if everything is amazing, nothing is amazing. If everything is awful, nothing is really awful. You need contrast to tell the difference between what is magical and what is not. What is awful and what isn't. What's amazing and what isn't. It is the what isn't part that makes the what is part stand in greater starkness. It stands out more if you have contrast to compare it to. So that's basically what the mind does. Now, mythological expressions of Gemini energy is Hermes and Mercury. Hermes is the Greek version. Mercury is what the Romans called this energy, but the Egyptians called this energy Thoth or Thoth. Or some people you might see as Thoth. Some people pronounce it Thoth. I've seen it as Thoth, Toth, Tote. So, depending on the lineage. And that is also Mercury Hermes energy. Now, if you've ever heard of Hermes Trismegistus, it means thrice great Hermes. And they are not referring to Hermes the god. It is the Greek name for Tote. Because they're saying, a lot of Greek philosophers, mathematicians, people of that nature had a tendency to go to Egypt to study. It was quite the thing. It was all the fashion, all the rage. And when they got there, they found out about Thoth. And they thought to themselves, this god is way better than our god. He's thrice great. He's that amazing. So that is how Hermes Trismegistus got the name thrice great Hermes, or Hermes thrice great. It's actually referring to Thoth, who predates both Hermes and Mercury, because most of these gods have their basis in Egypt and beyond. Okay, so Hermes energy is a psycho, pomp, and boundary crosser. How did we get there? Well, we got there because Hermes, Mercury were the messenger gods. Hermes was the only god that could go to the Olympian, could go to the underworld. We're not talking about Hecate, we're talking about the Olympians. He was one of the few gods from that particular lineage and pantheon who could go to the underworld and could cross boundaries. Most people could not do that. There are very few gods and goddesses that have that ability. He's one of them. Another is Hecate, and a third is Persephone. It's not common for gods to do that. So that's how we get boundary crosser. Also, the Norse god Loki. Now, a curious thing about Loki, when I said transgressive, you might also hear the energy is ambiguous. That would be like androgyny. So kind of an androgynous energy. And Loki, curiously, had given birth to some of their own children. So some of the children, Loki had lovers of many different classifications from all walks of life, but sometimes Loki just felt the need to just produce children on their own and gave birth to their own children. So there's that interesting edge. And so that's the Norse god Loki. That's that kind of edge, paradigm shifting, boundary crossing, rule breaking, but boundary blurring type of energy, okay? And so Coyote and Raven are trickster figures across many indigenous traditions, and so you'll also see that. I've also seen, I've seen Coyote, I've seen Raven, I've seen Fox. Fox is another energy that tends toward the trickster, and so Gemini gets kind of a trickstery type of vibe because its planetary guide, Mercury, has that reputation. And so let's move on a bit to gathering allies and information. So you're having the adventure. You had the idea to have the adventure. You got the call to action. Okay, you are learning skills and whatnot at Hogwarts. Or if we're Wednesday Addams and you're watching that, they don't teach you. They don't show as much, but what they're showing is Wednesday learning to deal with her psychic abilities. Wednesday learning to investigate because, learning to those type of skills, she's naturally a curious and investigative, I want to go deeper type of person. But from pop culture, she can't do it alone. And so with Wednesday, you're going to see her gathering allies. If you've been watching, she's going to gather her allies, like everyone does. You might also notice, if you pay attention to Harry Potter's world and that franchise, Harry Potter answers the call to action. Hogwarts letter, finally gets there, starts to learn magic. It turns out you have to learn how to do it properly. And whilst there, starts to gather information, meaning learn more magic, and gather allies. He meets Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, in addition to Neville Longbottom and a few other people, and having long-standing connection with Dumbledore. And so it's gathering allies, gathering information type of vibe. And so psychologically, there's a necessity of diverse perspectives. So the hero must always move beyond self-sufficiency to engage with otherness after establishing foundation. Now, by the way, otherness can be found in the chart. And when I say found in the chart, you're going to look at Mercury, for example, otherness. Chiron, otherness. Uranus, otherness. The houses 7 through 12 introduce you to the other. Not you, but other, okay? The MC is otherness because you're looking at other people's perception of you, whereas the ascendant is what you think of you, how you perceive you. The MC is how others perceive you publicly, okay? So that is being awake to diverse perspectives. Diverse perspectives is very ninth house, for example. So if you had that Gemini energy hanging out there, it's a necessity for diverse perspectives. This is why we feel the urge. After you've set up a foundation and done, getting that knowledge, you now need many different perspectives on how magic can be done. You just don't have Harry Potter just learning Earth, how to work with plants. Yes, he takes a class on herbology to learn about that particular context, that lens for magic. And then there's potions, that's another lens. And then there's divination, yet another lens. And there's stargazing, many different lenses, which are merely another way of saying a different perspective on magic that he's being exposed to at a very young age. Because he has to move beyond self-sufficiency. He needs to engage with other people after that foundation is being established. So he's left the mundane world for this new magical world and is now having to gather information, find allies, and get a new perspective on the world as he knew it, which he is also leaving behind. So there's also a sacred curiosity here. And you explore, we're looking at how Gemini energy opens us up to genuine questioning. And the whole point of that is to transcend a belief in rigid opposites, rigid dichotomies, dualities, nihilism, for example, dogmatism. Now, I avoid dogmatism because that for me is a heavily loaded word, given my own background. One day I will go into that more, but today we're going to just step right over that. And so it's genuine questioning. Why? What about this? Why is that way? What about that? So it's like that kid that was always asking questions. But why? Why is the sky blue? Why is dirt black or brown? Why is that tree doing that? What's that dog doing? Why is that person saying that? Why do they look like that? What's going on? That's all very Gemini energy, very youthful, very creative, very inquisitive, genuinely questioning. So curiosity can be seen as a sacred thing. It's not necessarily negative. Now, when I was a kid, it was definitely seen as a negative. Asking questions was not something that people liked. It was seen as challenging authority rather than curiosity. Trying to figure out how the world works, you have to answer questions about how it works, meaning established Taurus energy. You have to say, okay, this is why it works, and this is how we do it that way, and this is why we do it that way. So curiosity can be reframed as a sacred thing as opposed to something we need to mitigate and avoid. And here is a point I would like to make right now. The idea that there is a right way to be and a wrong way to be when the only you on the planet is you. You're the only you. There are no other yous hanging around. In other realities, that's possible. I believe that maybe that's possible. But in this reality, we are the only thems, the only us's that there are, and therefore we are the only experts. And so I said 2 episodes ago in the Aries episode, we have a tendency that we have a fixed and absolute idea. There's a right way to be, and we all should be this way. Disagree. Diversity of perspective is necessary for a healthy society and a healthy sense of self. Being curious about who you are and your place in the world and how the world works and how you want to work with the world is your part of your work here. Part of my work here. So the idea that there is a good way to be a Gemini or a bad way to be a Gemini. There is no typical Gemini energy. There's no typical Taurus energy. There is no typical Aries energy or any of the other zodiac signs. There is no such thing as typical. There is only our unique expression of it, and it should not behoove us to get involved with that, to step in, lean in, and get in there and learn about how we operate in this world, because our choices will be wiser choices if we do them from a place of authenticity rather than just merely performing what that's supposed to look like. So let's not have the idea that being curious is wrong or being what people call flaky. Gemini energy is not flaky. It's not scattered. It is curious and broad. It wants details, of how this works. How does this work? And then over time, it's basically like putting together a puzzle without having the picture available. You're kind of flying blind in the dark. That's kind of what Gemini energy sometimes has to do in order to be open to engaging with others. Otherness. It's engaging with that which opens up your perspective. So curiosity can be sacred. Now here's the paradox of knowledge. Authentic understanding requires both gathering information and recognizing the limitations of what we can know, because the mind can only take you so far. And this is a key point made in the Doctor Strange Marvel franchise. In the second installment called the Multiverse of Madness, you see that prevalent, but it's the first one in which the Ancient One informs Doctor Strange that he's gone as far as he can with the mind, and that is the paradox of knowledge. The thing about knowledge is it's great to have, but the downside, sorry, dreadfully dry throat, the paradox of knowledge is that it doesn't always make you happy. You can't always make use of it immediately in the moment. Sometimes it causes uncertainty, and it causes anxiety, because knowing something doesn't always motivate you to take action. And sometimes you get analysis paralysis, or you get way too much information and it overloads you. So it can also be a way of resisting change. I need to gather more information. Ooh, bright, shiny thing. And so sometimes this energy has its downside in that it's constant gathering of information, constant facts, like a magpie looking for shiny bits. And so there is a limitation to what we can know. It's not possible for us to know everything. It's just not. There is way too much information out there. Science is never going to answer every question. It's just not going to happen. It is innocent, sweet, and naive of humanity, and therefore scientific practitioners, to believe that one day science will do what religion was never able to do, which was to explain the nature of the universe. It's not going to happen. But I honor that sacred impulse to know, to question. And I find beauty in that. There are limitations to what we can know, and that doesn't exactly have to be the worst thing that happens to us. Now, one of the things about Gemini energy is you become very aware of duality. So how do we integrate duality? Because that's another thing. Paradoxes are like, those proverbs and koans where they give you something paradoxical. For example, change is the only constant in the cosmos. Change is absolutely not constant. Constant means that something is staying fixed and more absolute, but change being the only constant makes that statement paradoxical, because there is no fix, there is no absolute per se. Okay, so we're dealing with duality. Duality is black and white, can be seen as black and white thinking. That's another way of saying that. So there are shadow expressions, of course, Gemini, like every sign. Superficiality, restlessness, fragmentation. And so superficiality is floating over the top, because you're always being distracted by the this amazing new insight, this amazing new ideal, or this beautiful, cute, wonderful thing of information over there that you just got to chase, that interrupts you, distracts you from the work at hand. So there's a sort of a superficiality, a restlessness. There's nothing, now, in and of itself, being superficial serves its purposes. Being restless, fragmented, serves its purposes. There are times when this is a necessary thing. The shadow expression here is when it stops being beneficial, when the distraction leads to us not going deeper into a topic, like, say, for example, we're writing a book, and it's an astrology book on the asteroid goddesses from a different perspective, and you're not able to go deep because you're always chasing this really new, cool idea. Ooh, yet another asteroid. Let me go chase after it. So now you have hundreds, if not thousands of asteroids to research. How are you going to write a book on thousands of asteroids? So you do superficial knowledge with all of them, thereby robbing your book of the intensity and the focus that would be necessary for you to write it, to be interested in it, and to attract readers. And there's also restlessness, because novelty is a really big thing with Gemini energy, and if you're always chasing novelty, you're always going to be restless and easily bored when things don't pop off quickly or do not interest you amazingly, which leads to fragmentation. You end up with pieces of ideas, but having never dug that well of knowledge deep enough, you now have just pieces of it. You don't know how any of it connects to anything else. And so when we're looking at figures, now, when I see this energy, I think of the Marvel Universe. I think Doctor Strange. Now, by the way, Doctor Strange, I really, really, really love that particular storyline in the Marvel Universe. It's one of my favorites, which is why I mention it so frequently. But his way of getting knowledge was very haphazard. Yes, he read through things, but if you notice in the first one, he would go grab this book, which appeared to have because he's confident to the point of arrogance that he believes, I can learn this and I can master this, which he does, but that is less about him being right and more about the fact that other people around him are going, hold on there, hold your horses, whoa there, and other people having to come up and support him and clean up the messes that he makes because he's restless. He can't sit still. And his knowledge of magic is he's a natural user, hence a sorcerer. By the way, a sorcerer, the difference between sorcerers and mages is that a sorcerer has the innate knowledge of magic, an innate skill asset, whereas a mage studies to be able to be good at it, and etc. And so the reason why I mention that is because there is Doctor Strange just grabbing books and whatever interests him, whatever he's curious about, which may not result in a holistically coherent picture. It might be just fragments of knowledge. Or, even better, if anyone listening has ever watched Legends of Tomorrow or have read the Hellblazer graphic novels, let me introduce you to John Constantine. John Constantine was played by, quite a few actors, not the least of which happened to be Keanu Reeves in Constantine, the film. Now, that energy is why I mention him, is because the joke and the constant conceit mentioned is that he is a low-level mage who knows a lot of tricks. He knows a lot of magic, but shallowly, So he's very Gemini in his energy, in that he knows, here, he can grab here. He even says so in the graphic novels and in the TV series that about Constantine, which eventually was cancelled before he went to Legends of Tomorrow. It's a very fascinating character, and that's very Gemini in his energy. He knows magic, a lot of magic, very superficially. You might also see this with multi-instrumentalists. The thing about learning an instrument or learning a skill in art or creativity is that it's not possible to be equally deep with all disciplines, which means that if someone is a drummer and they can play guitar and they can play other instruments, they're probably not going to be able to bring those skills up to the drumming level skill, because there's only so many hours in a day, and your nervous system, your brain, has limits. So you're not going to be able to know 7 instruments and be equally amazing at them all. When you hear people say that about multi-instrumentalists, it's simply because people are more awed by the fact that someone can play an instrument at all, and the fact they can play 7 is highly impressive. People don't think of the fact that it's not likely that people play instruments equally well. Or consider us all going back to secondary school. Consider that throughout our training as children, moving into adolescence and then into our young adult years, that we study different subjects, history, art. We do this. It's like throwing all these new topics at us. So we are not going to be know these topics deeply. It's just not possible. It's not possible to be good at 7 different subjects when you're attending school. It's illogical to assume that, and it's something that our schooling does not take into account. So some of the gifts and challenges of Gemini energy is that curiosity, but some of the challenges are, okay, this is boring me. It's not novel anymore. It's not turning me on anymore. I need to go find something else. And so to transform that duality into more of a complementarity, learning to honor differences without being lost in endless relativism. Is this relativism this is relative to that, relative to whatever's going on. So it's not chasing ideas just to chase ideas. It's not chasing novelty just because it's novel. It is being mindful about what you chase. Consider Alice in Wonderland chasing a rabbit down a hole. Not every rabbit hole is meant for you to go into, and not every rabbit's meant for you to chase it, okay? And you'll see that also in the Matrix. Not every rabbit hole was for him to chase down, but when he chased a rabbit down a hole, it was the right hole for him. So that's kind of very Gemini-type energy. And so what we want to do here with Gemini energy teaches us to honor differences, but to avoid losing ourselves in those differences. You can still see differences and diversity in other people without losing who you are and what matters most to you. Okay? And next up is the spiritual dimension of the messenger archetype. Multiplicity is a path toward being inclusive and compassionate. And how that is now you're aware of duality, but now you want to ask the question, what's beyond it? Is there something beyond it? Is the middle way between 2 arbitrary opposites the right way? So, for example, shades of gray, yes or no? Is that the mature way to be? Let's avoid whether or not it's the right way to be. Let's ask the question, does this make us more inclusive and compassionate? Is this a compassionate choice? Am I being more inclusive with ideas? Am I inviting in perspectives that are different from mine just so I can be more aware, so I can avoid duality? Excessive duality can be problematic. It can make you feel fixed, absolute, and can lead to rigidity that makes it so that we start pushing other people to act in ways that are best for us but not best for them, and then becoming very offended when people refuse to be what we want them to be. So Gemini energy asks us to be more inclusive, to include other people's points of view. You don't have to adopt those points of view. You don't have to live your life according to them. You don't even have to believe them. The only thing you say is, I understand that this person has that point of view. I get it, and this is my point of view. They're allowed to have that point of view, and this is the point of view I choose to have. Okay? So, a key takeaway here is truth emerges through relationship, not isolation. Truth emerges through comparison of 2 opposites, not necessarily seeing that one is better than the other, but only that black is beautiful and so is white, and that Light is lovely, and we also need darkness. Joy is magnificent, but it's periods of suffering and pain that makes that joy the gold that frees and nurtures our souls. And so the Gemini archetype teaches us that meaning itself is born in the space between perspectives. So we don't need to rush to have a perspective. There's a creative tension of apparently opposing truths. And it's also to meet Rumi in that field, beyond the dichotomy between good and evil. And with that said, the next episode we will explore Cancer, the cosmic nurturer, and how the hero must develop emotional resilience and connection to origins after gathering diverse perspectives. And so feel free to ask questions of your chart. Find out where Gemini is. Find out where Mercury is. Ask, how do you communicate? How have you experienced duality? Where have you become fixed and rigid? Are you being as inclusive and compassionate in your thinking as you could be? Where can you become more curious and use sacred curiosity to open up? Where can you live in the space between perspectives and that creative tension between opposing truths? You don't have to choose a side. You don't even have to choose the middle. You can go beyond that. How would you do that? And with that said, thank you very much for tuning in. And until next time, peace and astro magic.